everyone, my name is Sam and thanks for checking out this video. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and give the video a thumbs up. Now I'm super excited and also kind of nervous about this. This is my first full video of a single book reviewing it. So this video I'm going to be talking about The Revolution of Marina M by Janet Fitch. Now this is classified currently while I'm doing this video as a standalone on Goodreads, but I do want to preface this that it is not going to be a standalone. It ends saying end of book 1, and then in the back panel it says that she's currently working on the next book in Marina's story. That being said, this book is a beast. It is 800 pages, and it doesn't even have pages in between chapters. A chapter ends halfway through a page, and then the next line is the beginning of the next chapter. So it is literally 800 pages. That being said, I whipped through this book in 2 days. I really enjoyed this book. Now, don't go into this book thinking it is kind of a fantasy YA or anything like that. It is definitely adult. It doesn't really have the same structure as a lot of fantasy books, or really just a lot of books in general that I normally read. Normally books have a beginning problem, and then you have a solution, and you work your way to that solution. That's not really how this goes. There is lots of problems, and you just follow this girl as she works her way through them. I also do want to preface this book before I even get going in it, that trigger warning that there is a sexual assault in here. It is not super violent or graphic, but it does occur. So I'm actually going to link in the description box down below a couple videos. One of them's called Russian History in 3 minutes. Another one's called Russian Revolution in 10 minutes. Just so people have a little bit of background information about it. You don't have to know the background information, but as someone who enjoys Russian history, I found it really interesting. Very few books are really able to touch on so many different parts of the Russian Revolution, especially fiction. They tend to just pick a single, event and stick to it. This book just went above and beyond. So in case you are not aware, right at the end, kind of in the middle of World War I, Russia was originally thrown into the war and kind of joined along everyone under Tsar Nicholas II. He wasn't a particularly liked Tsar. He was kind of viewed as pretty weak as well. If you know Rasputin, that's kind of that person there. And, things just go from bad to worse. And Nicholas just honestly was not prepared. They didn't have the supplies. And very quickly, his population turned on him. You had, forced factory work while the bourgeoisie were, having parties while everyone was there wasn't even enough bread to get rations. And things just went from bad to worse when Nicholas lost control of the railways. Because of how big Russia is geographically, the railways were essential, and he lost them. And he lost a lot of support from soldiers who began to turn on him. So before the end of World War I, he abdicated, and he was actually eventually assassinated. If you've ever seen Anastasia, the real person was his daughter. And she herself, we've kind of fantasized it, but essentially she was also killed along with her father. Now, it's not all of a sudden he abdicated and then Russia just suddenly became Soviet. There were several years of chaos, and that's kind of where this starts. It goes from right before his abdication to, this book ends in the middle of the Civil War. So it covers about 3 years or so. So we follow the story of Marina. She is born into a bourgeoisie family. Her father is a politician who eventually actually ends up becoming a part of the Duma, which sounds good at first, but it doesn't go well. She has an older brother who's away at war. She has a younger brother, and her parents and her seem to get along quite well until she actually comes face to face with how the lower classes are living, and she just starts rebelling against her family and what they expect of her. She could have lived for several years in pure privilege, and her family were definitely privileged. They talk very privileged. They're just totally obnoxious and just totally unaware and unrealistic of everything that's going on. She very quickly starts interacting with people in social circles and decides that she wants to join this movement, the Bolshevik Soviet movement. Now, a little bit about Marina. She starts off being about 16 years old. She is a published poet in Moscow. Like I said, she's quite privileged. This book, you see how much of a survivor she is. Strong doesn't even to begin to describe it. However, she is not perfect. She goes through several different romantic relationships in this book. Honestly, some of them are quite heartbreaking when you see how she just uses it to survive, really. But she goes through a marriage, and she cheats on someone, she gets cheated on as well, and it's just so interesting to see someone grow. But in the end, she starts actually getting out on her own until she gets involved with a cult. I really loved the fact that Marina M was not some like pure virginal woman. It was really realistic, I think, for the time period. When you look at what women had to do in World War I and even in World War II just to survive and to get food and to take care of themselves, let alone, you know, other people, they sacrifice a lot of themselves. And you see that, you know, she's definitely trying to be a good person and is doing that as much as possible, but she's not willing to die, you know, starving because she won't, you know, work for someone or something like that. She makes a lot of mistakes along the way, and it's not like mistakes she is forced to do. She full on sometimes just chooses the wrong thing. And it was just so interesting and kind of refreshing to see a character that I remember like thinking several times of like, this seems very realistic. I also found it pretty amazing how much she takes care of her family despite the falling outs that they have. I mean, obviously there's the political one, but there's big things that happen in this book. And even, you know, after each event, you know, you have party swinging almost daily of who is in charge of the country. And it changes based on geography, too. If you're in the north, if you're in the east, on Monday and then on Tuesday, you are under completely different political realms. So despite all this going on, she still takes the effort to try and take care of her mother, who, and honest, as I was reading this, I was just kind of like, just leave them be. Like, just take care of yourself. But she just, you know, like I said, she's just a decent person, and she wants to try and do as much as she can for as many people as possible. Now, I'm not a big fan of romances in general. I feel like they're overused or kind of used as a crutch by authors, but I actually found the romances in this really interesting. Like I said, she kind of uses them as crutches as well as ways to survive, but like it's not really demeaned. You see her in different ways in each of the relationships, really. She cheats on someone and she gets cheated on as well, but you kind of forget when everything else is going on until the romances that she's like a teen, basically. She's not even 20 years old, and she gets her heart broken and she breaks some hearts herself. So it's honestly just it was just really refreshing and I found, and just realistic for what I think the situation of the time would be. Because of all of the craze and the upheaval and the politics and the passions going on at the time, you know, you're gonna flip-flop all over the place, especially at her age. And as well as, it kind of just showed the change going on in the country at the time. You know, she was a bourgeois class. They normally have an arranged marriage and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, like, she's 16 and she goes out and hooks up with some dude that she finds attractive, and you know, it just kind of goes from there. I think it just showed right at the beginning the stark contrast of how she wanted to live her life and how her family was going to expect her to be living her life. I absolutely loved the setting. I think Janet Fitch did a really good job of just showing, like, a lot of it takes part in, the name changes a couple times, but St. Petersburg, where she is from. But you see, and it's something that comes up in a lot of, like, wartime issues of, like, people have an attachment to their homelands and they want it to stay and they want to make it better. And even if it's, you know, it doesn't happen, they want to try to do that. And I think Fitch did a great job of showing the differences between, you know, like St. Petersburg, Moscow, rural Russia. You visit a couple different, like, small villages, and to just show the difference of, like, how isolated rural Russia could be. It's, you know, it's amazing when you think of, like, over 100 years ago or so, where, you know, people couldn't afford or didn't have access to a telephone for several. You had to just, like, wait 3 months for a letter to get sent and returned to you. So, I mean, I thought Fitch just did a really good job of it, and including the weather was a big aspect that I think is, I mean, I get it in Canada, but I mean, like, you know, trudging through the snow and, like, just incorporating those little bits, as well as it helped be aware of, like, the time passing. Writing-wise, this book is not overly, like, emotionally written. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it almost seems like you get the point from Marina. She's telling the story, but she seems almost like she's observing what is happening from an outside perspective. Even with the romances, it's not overly detailed, it's not sappy, it's not romantic. It's just very, like, blunt of, like, this is what is happening. My favorite part of this book was probably just how she kind of flows from one place to another. She doesn't really necessarily fit in each place, but like I said, she's a survivor, and you see her in so many different settings, and just think on the spot of, oh my god, okay, how am I going to get money for food? Where am I going to find a place to live? How am I going to get myself out of this situation? And she's so smart and observant and quick, and I think a little bit of luck too, thanks to Fitch. But I just really loved seeing the flow of how she just figures things out. Like, I feel like in this situation, because it was a real historical time period, I don't know that I would have been able to survive. This girl goes through so much. I mean, I thought I had an unstable family growing up sometimes, and, like, compared to this, it's nothing. I think my least favorite part of this book was Marina's dad, even though he did like play a role, but he is just not a good person. They get along when she's being good to him and good for him and like benefiting him. As soon as she strikes out to be her own person, he slut shames her, he calls her names, he literally gets her like kidnapped, abandoned, sent away, because just as a way to get back at her. And for that reason, I was just like, just leave the family be. They have not done anything for you. Just go and strike out on your own. I think the weirdest part of this book for me, and it's not weird in a bad way, was you look at Russia now, and even during the craziness of the revolution, Russia this time is much more accepting and open-minded than current day Russia, which I find just amazing to realize of like in 100 years they've gone so far back in terms of like people using religion and, separation of religion and government and, LGBT especially, because there is a female-female romantic relationship here. And I mean, it's not really made a big deal of, so I just found that super, super interesting. Overall, I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I will definitely pick up my own physical copy of this book and a copy of the sequel whenever it does come out. I've also heard a lot of good things about Janet Finch's other book. People keep asking me if I read White Oleander, so I think I'm going to check that one out eventually, slide it onto my TBR, try and get to it maybe before the next book of the Marina comes out. We'll see. But I was just really, really impressed by this book overall and the writing. If you're a history buff, definitely for you. You don't have to know anything about Russia at the time. In all honesty, it may even be like a very eye-opening experience for you to help figure things out. That being said, if you do know about everything going on in Russia in the time, like I said, how you had the Tsar abdicate, then the Duma take over, then the Duma gets overthrown, then you have an election, but they don't like the results of that election, so they change it, and then there's a civil war, and there's the cities fighting with the cities, and then there's the rural community who just wants to kind of like stay out of it and farm their stuff and survive, and it's just so interesting. I hope all of those thoughts made sense. I just had things that I wanted to like throw out there, and I hope I got my points across without getting too spoilery. I don't think I let any spoils out. Make sure to check the description box down below for links to all of my social media. If you follow me, I will follow you back.